So, the Bayesian game in summary is as follows. The players, set of jurors, the states, the set of states is a set of all lists X, S1, Sn, where X can take the values G or I, and S small j can take the values G or B, so guilty or innocent, for every juror J. And X equals G means defendant is guilty, and X equals I means defendant is innocent. And Sj equaling G means player J receives a signal that the defendant is guilty, and Sj equaling B means player J receives a signal that the defendant is innocent. And the actions are set of actions each player can take, which is either vote to convict or acquit, C or Q, and the signals, the set of signals each player receives is either G or B, and player J's signal function tau J, which is a function of the statuses of the defendant, is Sj, which means that each juror player is informed of only her own signal. Okay? And the beliefs of the players. So, after receiving information, each juror has a belief about whether about the state of the defendant, whether they're guilty or not. So type G of any player I, which is any player I receiving a signal G, believes that the state is G, as in player X being G, so the defendant being guilty, with probability, with the following probability, and that is the probability that the defendant is guilty and the player receives the signal G, multiplied by the probability of any other player receiving the signal G to the power of k minus 1, multiplied by the probability of other player receiving the signal B, given that the defendant is guilty, multiplied by n minus k. So this is the probability that the defendant is guilty given player I receives signal G, and P is the probability of any other player receiving signal G. So this is essentially a belief of player I about other players' signals. And 1 minus P is the probability of other players receiving signal B, that the defendant is innocent, given his true state is G, or given that player I believes that the true state is G. And also, type G of any player I, so player I receiving the signal G believes that the state is I, not G, S1 all the way to Sn, with the following probability, and that is the probability that the defendant is innocent, given that player I received the signal G, multiplied by 1 minus q to the power of k to the minus 1, multiplied by q to the power of n minus k. And this is the probability that the defendant is innocent, given player I receives signal G, and 1 minus q is the probability of any other player receiving signal G, if you guys remember it, in any state which x equals I. So in the state x equals I, so the probability of another player receiving signal G is 1 minus q, and q is the probability of any other player receiving signal B, that the defendant is innocent, where K is the number of players, including player I, for whom the signal is G. And obviously N is the total number of jurors, or the total number of players. Now, type B of any player I, so the player that, the type where that receives the signal that the player is innocent, believes that the state is G, i.e. the defendant being guilty with the following probability. The probability that the defendant is guilty given that the player I has received the signal B, multiplied by P to the power of K, 1 minus P to the power of N minus K minus 1. And this being the probability that the defendant is guilty given player I receives signal B, and P is the probability of other players receiving signal G, given that the defendant is guilty, and 1 minus P is the probability of other players receiving signal B. And type B of any player I believes that the state is I, i.e. believes that the defendant is innocent with the following probability. So it's the probability of the defendant being innocent given that player I receives the signal B, that he is innocent, multiplied by 1 minus Q to the power of K, multiplied by Q to the power of N minus K minus 1. And this being the probability that the defendant is innocent given player I receives signal B, and 1 minus Q to the power of K is probability of other players receiving signal G, given that player I received the signal B and he believes the state of the world that the defendant is innocent, and Q is the probability of other players receiving signal B, where K is the number of players for whom Sj equals G. And again, N is the total number of jurors.